All right, welcome to another meeting of the House Corporations Elections and Political Subdivisions. Today is our last meeting until the crossover, which means the three House bills that we have in front of us today are the last House bills that will come before us. We have a aggressive agenda with the hope of getting through those three House bills because it is our last opportunity to hear them. We have to be back in the chamber at 2. Did we end right on the mark? So it's 2 p.m.?
Yep.
Is that right, guys? Okay. With that, Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Excused.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Knapp.
Here.
Representative Newsom. Excused. Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Wiley.
Here.
Representative Yin. Excused. And
Yes,
Chairman
excused.
Olson.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, the first bill for our consideration is House Bill 279, voter identification requirements. We have the House sponsor, Vice Chairman Knapp. Welcome to Corporations Committee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Today I have House Bill 279, and it's a simple cleanup bill that just requires a person who is personally coming in to get an absentee ballot to provide ID. And with that, I would ask questions of the committee.
That is pretty simple. So under the current process, if I show up at a polling station to cast my vote, I have to present an ID before I can be checked in. But if I want to vote absentee, if I show up at the clerk's office to request my ballot, then I do not have to show an ID.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So this is simply closing a loophole that was in the laws to require ID with both.
And then what if I request my absentee ballot by mail? So I mail in the request. What happens then? Does your bill cover that?
This is simply for the personal one. I don't know if that's covered in statute currently for that request of absentee by mail. And maybe some of the directors that come after me can answer that question.
Okay. Committee, other questions? Really straightforward bill. All right. Thank you, Vice Chairman Knapp. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, for the record. I'm the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my right is Joe Rubino, our General Counsel and Chief Policy Director. Very excited. The last election-related bill before crossover, I think, is pretty non-controversial, but it is an important change. I stand in support of House Bill 279. A little bit of the background on this bill. When we drafted voter ID, one of the determinations we had is that the initial iteration would not apply to absentee ballots that were requested by mail, or what I thought at the time as the drafter was the normal way of requesting an absentee ballot. There are some bills to look at that, but those were not heard. It's a separate issue on voter ID, and I think that's for another session. I think at the conclusion of this meeting, 2 of them will die. They are not on the agenda. But the understanding was that all voting that initiated in person would require a voter ID. That was sort of the intent of the legislation. A lot of people started fielding calls. I was one of them over the summer on this sort of loophole that didn't quite get into the bill. And sometimes this happens on big changes where people were requesting absentee ballots in person, and that did not require a voter ID. And it just really doesn't make sense, because voting early in person does require a voter ID. The intent of the legislation was that any balloting that initiated in person would require a voter ID to prevent impersonation. So it really is a loophole, and this closes that. And it really wasn't considered as a part of the original bill. And I think this is an important change, and it's just for the elector requesting their individual ballot the way it's drafted. So I ask for an aye vote.
Committee questions for Secretary Representative Chadwick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a very superfluous question almost, but so when I was asked for my ID, when I voted absentee, is that a choice of the county clerk?
Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, call me on a line if this, but can I ask a few questions about your circumstance? So you requested an absentee in person and they asked for your
Correct,
ID?
at the county clerk's office.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes different clerks have different interpretations. I think the Natrona County clerk maybe was a little more in line with the original interpretation of the statute. We're probably going to get some testimony actually a little later. The complaints mainly came out of Albany County, where the clerk there took the position that the statute did not cover absentee ballots requested in person. I'm heartened to hear that maybe there were some clerks that, because really the intent of the legislation was that balloting that initiated in person, and I was a little surprised, frankly, that someone could walk off with an absentee ballot. I thought the whole point of absentee balloting was that it was going to be mailed, and early balloting would be initiated in person. I was a little surprised about this nuance, but it's okay. I can kind of understand why that's there, because maybe someone near the courthouse wants to do some research, so they request what's considered an absentee ballot. But that clerk in Albany County had that interpretation. So certainly I think the other interpretation would be in line with the intent of the statute. And sometimes we do have 23 county clerks, and sometimes I think they discuss things and come out a little differently on where the statute's at. But that's why we're here, to close this loophole and get some uniformity. Thank you.
Follow up? Nope. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks.
Clerks, come on up. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. My purpose today is to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections, and particularly the requirement of presenting acceptable voter identification to obtain an absentee ballot in person. County clerks support this piece of legislation. We appreciate the clarification, and I believe that's what we're striving for. Mr. Chairman, Representative Chadwick, I think there'll be clarification for your clerks so that the clerks can administer this uniformly across the state. If there were issues in other counties, everybody will be doing it the same. And it only kind of makes sense that if you go to vote at the polls, you're required to present a acceptable ID. If you're requesting a ballot, voting early, it should be the same. So I have nothing else. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stand for those.
Questions for our clerks? Association? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional public testimony on this bill? Come on up.
Good afternoon, Representative, Chairman Olson.
You just have to turn that mic on.
Oh,
Just light
better
it up.
turn, I'm awful loud, so I apologize. But good afternoon, Chairman Olson and representatives. I want to thank you for allowing me to come and speak today. My name is Roxy Hensley, and I am chairman of the Albany County Republican Party in Laramie, Wyoming. And this issue came up in the last election in our county, which we brought it to the attention of the Secretary of State as well as our clerk's office. It was confusing for our voters, and it was confusing for the community. I want to give you a little bit of background. During the early voting, which was basically 6 weeks of early voting at the courthouse, I'm proud to say that we had poll watchers at the courthouse every day for almost every shift of those 6 weeks. And our poll watchers gave us detailed reports of the happenings that were going on during the early voting. And this is one of the issues that came up on a regular basis, if not a daily basis. We had voters that came in that requested an absentee ballot, and some of them thought that they had to provide an ID, while others came in and said that they understood that they did not have to provide an ID. So in our reports, it was confusing for people, and we did. We are in the process of submitting a report to the Secretary of State, and I urge you to look at that report for any further legislation that you might engage in the future. I do want to say that I want to stress the fact that when most of us who are concerned about the election process and we bring up examples of election irregularities, we do so not to cast dispersions on the county clerk, nor the Secretary of State's office, nor the state government, or anyone else, but rather to bring to the light of day the insecure features of the processes which can and are being politically exploited by operatives. The focus over recent decades has been to ensure that every eligible voter in every possible circumstance has unfettered access to the ballot box. This has led to extended voting periods, mail-in ballots, drop boxes, unrequested absentee ballots, varied or no requirements for IDs. While guaranteeing the right to vote is certainly a worthwhile goal, we cannot afford to lose sight of the fact that every illegitimate ballot that finds its way into the system has the potential to cancel out a legitimate vote, and thereby disenfranchising the legal voter. As we move forward, we must find a way to balance the sometimes competing issues of voter access and election security. We must then ask ourselves, and I quote, how valuable is voter access to a system that is not secure? This is the reason why I'm asking for a yes vote on the bill in front of you. Thank you, and I stand for any questions.
Committee, do you have questions for Ms. Hensley? No? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Great, thank you.
Any additional public testimony on this bill? Okay, do we have public testimony online for this bill? No. All right, I'll close public testimony on this bill. Committee, what is your pleasure? Move the bill. Moved by Representative Wiley, seconded by Representative Haroldson. Any amendments on this bill to page 1? Amendments on page 2? Discussion on this bill? Question on the bill. Barb, will you do a roll call vote on House Bill 279, voter identification requirements?
Representative Chadwick?
Aye.
Representative Haroldson, sorry. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Harshman?
Excused,
Oh,
unless he left. Did he leave anything with you?
he didn't leave anything with me, no. Vice Chairman Knapp, do you have his?
He left an aye vote. Surprise.
Representative Newsom? No.
Excused.
Representative Ottman?
Aye.
Representative Wiley?
Aye.
Representative Yin left a no absentee. And Chairman Olson.
Aye.
6 and 2.
Okay,
6 ayes, 2 noes.
perfect. The
No,
next,
1 no, sorry.
sorry, go ahead. What was that again, Barb? What was the vote count?
6 aye, 1 no.
6 aye, 1 no. Okay.
And 2 excused.
2 excused.
Thank you.
All right. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 204, allowable train lengths. We have the sponsor, Representative Chestick. Introduce us to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Representative Ken Chestick. I'm the sponsor of this bill. I'm very proud to support and bring to you House Bill 204 for your consideration, a bill dealing with allowable train lengths. Imagine that you're an engineer driving a train loaded with a variety of products, tanker cars, box cars, flatbeds, intermodal cars. The train is 3 miles long. I mean, 3 miles long, running along a single track main line. You're pulling the train slowly over the rolling terrain that is common throughout Wyoming. Suddenly, the brakes on the train engage without any warning to you, and this train rolls to a stop. Something's gone wrong. You've lost air. The brakes engage because you lost air in the braking system due to some unknown mechanical failure in the 3 mile long train behind you. You have no idea where along those 3 miles the breakdown occurred. So after the train rolls to a stop, you have to get out of the train, walk the length of the train looking for the problem, which could be as far as 3 miles behind you. Once you find the problem and figure out what the problem is, you then either have to walk back to the cab, which could be again as long as 3 miles behind you, or you call for help, which could be hours away to figure out how to fix the problem, and you wait. Meanwhile, every grade crossing along that 3 mile train length is blocked. No ground traffic, no cars, no emergency vehicles, nobody can get around the train without driving for many miles to either the nearest overpass or unblocked grade crossing. Emergency vehicles cannot get through. Other train traffic that it needs to use that same single track in front of you or behind you has to stop as well and wait for your train to be repaired, to get moving again. So you might think to yourself that train breakdowns are uncommon. This is just the price we pay for using a more efficient long train to move goods. But the reality is that long trains do break down far more frequently than short trains. It's a matter of simple physics, exacerbated because you are running through hilly terrain. Imagine how much extra weight there is when you're going up and down. Part of the train's going uphill, part of the train's going downhill because of the length of the train and all the weight. Creates all kinds of internal pressure on the links, the knuckles, the couplings between the cars. Derailments are far more common on long trains than they are on shorter trains. And if a car carrying hazardous material derails, such as a tanker car carrying flammable materials, the derailment could be catastrophic. Even without breakdowns, though, the normal operation of long trains clogs the system. Most sidings are only 8,500 feet long, the length of a normal-sized train. But long trains can be double that distance, could be 15,000 feet long, close to 3 miles, or over 3 miles. And those trains are becoming more common. When a monster train like that stops, even in normal operation, such as to recrew, it can block intersections behind it for very long periods of time. Cheyenne, for example, is a very common place for trains to stop and recrew. And the longer the trains, the more likely intersections are being blocked. There's an intersection here on Southwest Avenue. It's 2-3 miles away from downtown. It's now blocked routinely almost every day. It's blocked maybe several times as the train stops and is recrewed, has to restart. It takes 10, 15, 20 minutes to recrew and restart that train. And meanwhile, Southwest Avenue, no emergency vehicles can go through there, and traffic can't get through there. It causes traffic problems on the ground. Even when trains are moving, normally. Long trains create delays for the shorter trains. So for example, if a long train and a normal train are both proceeding towards each other on a single track, the shorter train has to pull off on the nearest siding because it fits on the siding. The long train doesn't fit on the siding. So the short train pulls off so that the long train or several long trains can go through, and the short trains have to stop. And it slows them down for sometimes hours while they're waiting for the traffic ahead of them to clear, and then they can proceed. And guess what kinds of trains are the shorter trains? They tend to be trains carrying ore, trains carrying trona, trains carrying coal from the Powder River Basin. The coal trains and the trona trains are the shorter trains. When they're loaded, they're fully loaded, a long train is almost impossible to move. So they tend to be the shorter trains, and they're the ones who are stuck on the sidings for hours. We're having a hard time moving coal and trona and other products because they're on the short trains that have to get out of the way of the bigger trains. Another committee heard testimony a few weeks ago from the mineral companies saying that they estimate that there were 50 million tons of coal they could not ship because of lack of trains. And the long train problem is a big part of that problem. It's slowing down the shipment of Wyoming coal. That 50 million tons of Wyoming coal that wasn't shipped cost the state $100 million in extraction fees, but it also cost the coal companies millions of dollars in product they couldn't sell because they couldn't get it shipped. And the long trains are a problem. Long trains aren't just a safety hazard, they're a drain on coal company revenues and a drain on the Wyoming economy. Now, the coal companies, the train companies may come in and testify that shorter trains will result in less shipping capacity and only exacerbate the problem, but that doesn't comport with common sense. Common sense suggests that the opposite is more likely true. Break that long train in half and have two shorter trains that could pass each other more readily on the sidings. That's going to speed up the shipment of coal. The shorter trains are going to move more readily because they can pass each other on the sidings that exist. So the shorter trains actually, I think, will increase the capacity to ship coal and other minerals. The shorter trains will not break down as frequently because they're shorter trains. The physics are easier and they're more likely to survive the passage. They're less likely to derail. They won't block intersections as frequently or as long as the long trains, creating fewer blockages for emergency vehicles. So HB 204 is a common sense measure to improve public safety, reduce intersection blockages, reduce derailments, increases public safety, but it also protects the mineral industry. And it creates more opportunity to ship product and sell product and keep our products on the market. The bill, and I'm not going to go through it line by line. I know you have it all in front of you.
Actually, I prefer that you walk us through the bill.
Okay, I will do so.
You don't have to go line by line, but
I will walk you through.
that didn't have to be the stopping point either, but I'm just saying, you can finish your opening comments, but I do want you to walk us through the bill.
Okay. All right, this is a good time to walk through the bill. After some basic definitions of branch lines and main lines, it explains what a train is. The heart of the bill really is in
Is that subsection B?
subsection B. On page 3, lines 12 through 18 is the heart of the bill. And I do have a proposed minor amendment to clarify. There's an or that needs to be clarified. So, but it basically says that trains must be shorter than 8,500 feet or the length of the shortest siding that they're going to pass, so that there's the ability to get off on the siding. The amendment that I would propose, it's on line 14, I would insert after exceeds the shorter of Romanet I, and then it would continue on 8,000 feet, or on line 15, replace exceeds with Romanet 2. So it's the shorter of those two things, or if it repeatedly or routinely blocks any intersection. So there's several different ways that this statute could be violated. If it's too long to fit on a siding, or if it's longer than 8,500 feet generally, and if it routinely or repeatedly blocks intersections for periods of 10 minutes. And there's some discretion given to the Director of Transportation to be able to enforce this. And those penalties are set forth on page 4, paragraph D, and also discretion given to the director is contained in paragraph E starting on line 13. And also there's discretion in the Attorney General to initiate civil action to collect civil penalties that might be imposed by the director. Fairly straightforward bill, but one I think that supports public safety, but also supports our industries. Our mining industries in particular will get some benefit, I believe, from this bill. Let's see if there's anything else. One more point. I did have LSO research this, and there is currently no federal regulations on train length. Now, that could change in the future. The federal government may come up with some regulations, and this is an issue that's increasingly being discussed around the country because these train lengths are getting longer and the issues are getting bigger. And I know that there are some studies going on at the federal level as to what to do about this, if anything. There's no guarantee that they will do anything, but for now, the regulatory field is empty, and the state does have the power and the right to impose these lengths. I think it's good policy, good public policy, good public safety policy, and good for our mineral industries. I do have several witnesses prepared to testify, but at this point, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Committee questions? Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Chestik. So currently, what's the longest train length that we're seeing? What is that?
I think some of the witnesses can testify.
Representative Chestik?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. Representative Haroldson, I think some of the witnesses have more direct testimony, have driven these long trains, actually. I think they're fairly routine now, 3 miles long, and I've heard of 4 mile long trains, but 3 miles is double the length that's being proposed here.
It's going to be my question. This 8,500 feet is 1.6 miles. How did you land on, what's the science behind 1.6 miles versus just cutting it in half? Or is that as simple as it is?
Mr. Chairman, the 8,500 is basically the length of current sidings. Most of the main lines have sidings of 8,500 feet. There may be a few that are shorter than that, but that's generally the typical length of a siding. It's also the length of a normal train. Most trains are 8,500 feet or less.
Okay. Committee? No? All right.
I would ask Tammy Johnson to testify.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure, do I need to wait till you open it to public comment? And I know you have agencies here as well. So.
Yep. So we're gonna go through, the way we'll do this is we'll pass through our agencies first, and then we'll go to general public comment. And,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, you bet. Department of Transportation. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Certainly our pleasure to be here today. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director of the Department of Transportation. With me today is Mr. Keith Fulton, our Assistant Chief Engineer for Planning, and Mr. Dan Klein, who actually is our employee, our leader in the rail space. Mr. Chairman, we do have, a couple comments. I'll keep it at the 30,000 foot level. If you got real specific stuff, we'll have to phone a friend to my left or right. As I will tell you, as we start down this road, first of all, our job, Department of Transportation, support the laws of the state and figure it out. And so certainly, this bill would change the way we currently do business. And so, from our standpoint, that's really what we'll talk you through is some of the implications there. But again, our task is to support the laws that you pass. Regarding how we're currently organized right now at YDOT, we have no oversight of rail. It doesn't exist. And so the oversight of rail really comes from the Federal Rail Administration. And, certainly we liaison with the railroads that operate within our state, but we have zero oversight responsibility there. We have 1.5 employees today who deal with rail. 0.5 is sitting to my right. So we deal with policy and we deal with really the safety issues of 382 at-grade crossings around the state. That's our focus, and that's our current interface with the rail. Certainly, we have good comms with rails, and specifically with Mr. Klein. So that's sort of how we sit today relative to rail. So as we look at how we would implement this if it passes, probably a couple considerations for this body. One is, as we read through here, it strikes us very much as an anti-blocking type issue in terms of blocking access on our roads. And I certainly understand that because, we've all been stopped. We all understand the issue with safety and those issues. Our understanding of law here was a quick look. And this particular set of rules is governed by our understanding the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act, and specifically 49 USC 10101. And the quick look that we did was that anti-blocking attempts at the state level have been struck down by the courts in other areas across the state. And, for example, one in Kansas that we just pulled up, where the rule was, the Court of Appeals, state of Kansas, was that the state anti-blocking statute was preempted by the ICCTA because it infringed on, the jurisdiction of the rail transportation in the United States. So that's our understanding of that at this point. I know there's smarter people than us in that space. I do recognize certainly that there's two impetuses here. One is the length of the train and one is the speed. As you think about the time that an intersection is blocked, which is really our focus, to me, it's a combination of length and speed. Long trains going faster probably have the same, effect on an intersection as short trains going slow. So there's that issue that I think you'd have to work through and understand. In terms of manpower, our initial thought was, this probably wouldn't affect us much. Although as we start taking a deeper look at it, somebody would have to take a complaint. Somebody has to verify the complaint. Somebody has to follow up on the issue. And so I do make the assumption at this point that there would be an increase in manning requirements for our department to handle really the administrative nature of the law should it pass.
Director Reiner, why is the fiscal note blank if that's the case? Is it just timing? Was it a timing factor?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. I noticed the same thing. Yes, it's timing. I think you start peeling this back and say, you know what? I don't think we can do this with the staff that we have. And so you go from an initial, I think it'd be okay, to, I don't think so anymore. A couple other issues that we think come into play in terms of, how we would execute this. And the good bringer of the bill certainly gave me in my position some latitude. But I think about, hey, did the train stop for safety? Did the train stop for mechanical issues? What's the process of measuring the train? You know, I make the assumption there's something we could do by putting some sort of counter in the tracks. I think we need access to rail property to do that. I don't know how that works. And so with those things in mind, Mr. Chairman, I think, my initial recommendation in terms of a potential amendment would be to require the director of YDOT to really promulgate rules and regulations. Because I think that while there's some details in this bill, I don't think there's enough for me to effectively regulate this at the state level and across the state. And so that would be my first comment in terms of, hey, I think we need rulemaking authority. And based on that, I think the effective date of this bill would be too quick, because it strikes me as a substantial amount of work that would go into the creation of rules and regulations, and would initially recommend you make the active effective July 1, 2024, to give some time for this to come to pass if you choose to pass it. Mr. Chairman, that's my comments from a fairly high level. We'll certainly stand by for questions there or anything specific to the other gentleman with me.
Any questions for YDOT? Yes, Representative Haraldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Reiner, so obviously you cited the interstate commerce clause and potential lawsuits that have come up on this. So it's my understanding that trains don't obviously stay in our state. We send trains all over this country that come out of our state. It's one of our beauties of our Powder River coal. People want it. They want to make power out of it. And so with that, would we be potentially breaching commerce clause of another state by regulating the rails to a certain length of train?
Director.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Klein.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, Dan Klein, Wyoming DOT, I don't believe we can answer that question. I think it's probably best coming from someone from the STB.
Okay, additional questions for YDOT? All right.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly will stand by, and certainly, we all know that rail plays a key important role in our economy. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate all the input. I was wondering the same thing on rulemaking, noticing that was lacking from the bill. Do we have any other state agencies wishing to testify on this bill? No? All right, then I will I'm just into general public comment then, so I'll take public comments.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tammy Johnson, the Executive Director for Wyoming AFL-CIO. I bet you're wondering why we brought this bill instead of somebody else. And it wasn't long ago that I was reading some of the publications. Rail Workers and Rail News has been a plethora of it since this contract negotiations were settled. It's got a lot of publicity. And saw an article that discussed the inability of the rail to get coal out of Powder River Basin, and that concerned me a lot. I'm a resident here, and I know that flushes our coffers up pretty good. It pays for schools, pays for roads, pays for a lot of things. And then when I saw that one of the reasons the rail companies said they couldn't move the coal was because of labor, it got my hackles up a little. And I thought labor's been under a lot of the microscope a lot lately. They settled their contract, and things are fine for them. They don't want to work any more than they already work. They're working enough, and they're working too much, and they have a contract settled, so this is not a labor issue for our workers. It is, however, an important piece that they observe every day when they're working. I think when the railroads say that this is a labor issue, they may be hoping that because labor discussions are preempted, you guys can't do a thing about it. So I want to be clear to you that even though there may be some issues with how many workers they have at the moment, we're not bringing this to you because this is a labor issue. we feel that that the coal should be moving out of Wyoming and that our railroad should be safe. We've all sat at those crossings when they've happened, when the rail train has been stopped. And so we're really interested in bringing this conversation out into the open so that we can begin to have some resolution. I noticed that the organizations that work with mining in the state and the organizations that sell the coal didn't want to join us on this, and that's fine. I understand. They have a service provider that meets their needs and takes care of their business, so they can't go up against them on an issue like this, but we can because we know what's at the heart of it. So that's why we brought this bill to you today, and we'd like you to consider it. I find it interesting in response to Director Reiner's comments that they would have to staff up for the number of complaints they're going to get for rail crossings. I think that's an illustration to you right now that it's a problem, and it could be even a bigger problem as the trains get longer. So yeah, if that means that we have to, if there's a law in place that says they can't do it and they're doing it, and then we have to staff up at YDOT, I think that illustrates for you that this is a bigger problem than what we may know. So I'm happy to answer any questions. We have brought today some rail workers. They've had to lay off to come and talk to you and share with you their experiences. And not all that wanted to come did come because they're concerned about their job security if they were to speak out. So the ones who are here are here on their own time and here to share with you their experiences as rail workers. So I hope that you'll give them the time to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Representative Haraldson, is that a bill that you're a sponsor of? You're the prime sponsor? Because I have to have a quorum.
Yeah, we're about to run out of a quorum.
I'd have to shut the meeting down if you leave. Do you want us to call over to that secretary? Otherwise, we can recess.
No, we're good. I'm
We
just gonna
can-
find someone that can run this bill for me, if I can. Let's continue.
Okay,
Continue.
sorry about that.
Nope, it's last day.
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to shove them all in.
All right, go ahead, Ms.
Anyways,
Johnson.
and I'm happy to stand for any questions that you may have, and that's all I have for you.
Questions for Ms. Johnson? Okay, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, representative committees. My name is April Ford and I live in Sheridan, Wyoming. I am employed as an engineer right now, hired out in 1998. In the last 24 years, I've seen a lot of changes on the railroad, but the changes I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years have me greatly concerned. In that time, the railroads have started to display a real lack of caring and understanding for the state of Wyoming and its citizens. They've put their profits above everything else, including their customers and safety. Wyoming is losing revenue due in part to the railroad's inability to get the coal trains where they need to be. The railroads in turn are calling it, like Tammy said, a labor issue. What they don't mention is that they've chose to adopt a business model called precision scheduled railroading. PSR has drastically reduced the labor force and in Wyoming, and also reduced safety as well. PSR also involves right-sizing the fleet, which means making trains longer. They've added more trains, doubling, or more cars to these trains, doubling, tripling, and sometimes quadrupling the size. Sometimes these trains can be in the excess of 3 miles. This sounds good in theory, but in practice it doesn't work, and it's not working for Wyoming. The railroads haven't updated their infrastructure, which means they haven't upgraded their rails to accommodate these trains. These longer trains have created congestions and bottlenecks all across the supply chain in the United States, and Wyoming is not immune. In the meantime, the shorter trains, which means the Wyoming coal trains, like we've talked about, are sitting in the sidings and waiting for these longer trains to get by. I see this every day in my job. These longer trains are breaking down and they're taking a longer length of time to fix, and they are also blocking the crossings for longer times. This creates major issues for the first responders and Wyoming residents. It can take over 30 minutes to cut a crossing. I understand that no lawmaker wants to tell a corporation how to run their business, but when it comes to the safety of Wyoming and the coal that it depends on, sometimes we have to stand up. This legislature does have the power to enact legislation when it relates to safety and train length, even if it affects the railroad activities. Preemption does not apply here. There are 4 other states that are running similar train length bills. Those states include Iowa, Virginia, Missouri, and Kansas. And beyond that, there are several other states that are running rail safety bills. So I'm asking you today to put Wyoming and its residents ahead of corporate interests and support House Bill 204.
And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. What was your name again?
April Ford,
April Ford. I
From Sheridan,
apologize
Wyoming.
for that. I did catch the Sheridan, Wyoming part.
and I stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Ford? All right.
Thank you.
Additional public testimony. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Nathan Anderson. I represent Union Pacific Railroad. I have with me at the table Connie Roseberry, Chief Safety Officer of Union Pacific Railroad, as well as my colleague Matt Jones from BNSF Railway. I'll attempt to be brief and direct in your committee. Thanks for the opportunity to present on this bill. Union Pacific Railroad is 100% focused on safety. It is our #1 priority, and we have no higher goal than running a safe, efficient railroad. One area where we have significant interaction with the public is at-grade crossings, as has been discussed, where the traveling public crosses our tracks on the same plane, where they can drive, walk, or ride in front of oncoming trains. We work closely with Wyoming DOT, as the director mentioned, and other road authorities on crossing design, inspection, maintenance, upgraded warning devices, as well as consolidation of crossings, grade separations, or overpasses or underpasses, and closures to limit interaction between the public and the trains. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, every 3 hours, someone is hit by a train in this country, and we are constantly looking for ways to reduce that interaction and eliminate those incidents. Train length provides one opportunity to limit at-grade interactions. Longer trains means fewer trains to move the same volume of critical goods in, out, and through the state and across the country. Limiting train length will result in more trains passing through crossings, increasing opportunities for train vehicle incidents, which statistically are the result of driver behavior such as ignoring traffic control and warning signs or driving around gates. We have invested heavily and strategically to allow for safe increase in train length without compromising safety and in fact enhancing it. On a very practical local level, this bill will create a negative financial impact to the state of Wyoming. I don't say that lightly, and I wish it weren't true. We struggle to meet demand from coal and other Wyoming producers due to crew availability and network fluidity. It's a local issue and a network issue driven by crew shortages, exacerbated by a challenging winter season. Limiting train length will result in the same number of trains due to staffing constraints, but far fewer cars, fewer tons of coal, less trona, less grain, and less of other important commodities getting to market. I respectfully request that you oppose House Bill 204, and I stand for any questions you have.
Committee questions for Union Pacific. Representative Chadwick, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have so many, I don't even know where to start. So you do say it'll have a financial impact on you, on the railroad industry, if we pass this bill.
Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Representative Chadwick. I think it will have a financial impact on the state of Wyoming in that we will move, as has already been mentioned, we will move fewer commodities that generate revenue for the state.
Follow up.
Follow up, Representative Chadwick, please.
We heard that the longer trains actually inhibit the movement of product on the state's rails. Could you speak to that?
Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Chadwick. I think that I actually would maybe defer to my colleague, Ms. Roseberry, to address that in greater specificity, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Ms. Roseberry, please.
It actually might be helpful, Representative, if maybe my testimony might answer that, and then we can come back to that if your question still remains.
Okay.
I plan to address that. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Connie Roseberry. I am the Assistant Vice President of Safety and the Chief Safety Officer for Union Pacific Railroad. I've been with Union Pacific for 18 years, primarily as an attorney and advocate in the law department, and most recently in the last 2 years with the operating department as the Chief Safety Officer. I am here today to respectfully express Union Pacific's opposition to House Bill 204. The foundation of everything we do at Union Pacific is safety. Railroads have lower employee injury rates than most industries and are the greenest, most efficient way to transport ground freight across our country. Our focus on safety extends to our employees, the customers we serve, and the communities through which we operate. Wyoming, and Cheyenne in particular, has been a steadfast partner in the history and growth of Union Pacific. In fact, I've been told it is not a coincidence that the Capitol sits right here at this location, so you can keep eyes on the railroad. There are thousands of daily activities and inputs required for our operations on our 32,000-mile, 23-state network and in our terminals and maintenance facilities. Being able to utilize our resources efficiently and leverage and flex capacity allows us to reduce the number of work events employees are required to perform. Operating trains with more rail cars results in fewer trains on the network. Fewer trains on the network reduces the potential for employee injuries, grade crossing collisions, and derailments. It also improves operating practices and network fluidity and contributes to many other key safety indicators. Increased train capacity did not occur overnight and is the result of significant work and learning over the past decade. This involves understanding and harnessing in-train forces, advanced train makeup and train handling rules, leveraging previously unavailable technology, and being responsive to ever-changing customer needs and requirements. We've also recently developed and deployed an operating practices command center with real-time capability to monitor the health and safety of trains as they traverse the network in order to mitigate or eliminate undesired events. In addition to the potential negative effects on safety, a train length bill would also restrict the flow of commerce into and out of Wyoming and impact customers and consumers who rely on a robust supply chain to deliver needed commodities. Moreover, and as mentioned by our YDOT testimony, federal law and precedent generally prohibit states from regulating train length. States are not permitted to directly regulate railroads' economic decisions, which include restrictions pertaining to train length. These state laws have been held to unreasonably burden and restrict the flow of commerce from state to state. For those reasons, House Bill 204, if enacted, would most certainly be challenged and held inconsistent with federal law. In conclusion, the most important message that I'd like to impart to you today is that Union Pacific will continue to leverage best practices, technology, and community input to improve our network integration and scheduling procedures. And I'm here to acknowledge we can do better. We must do it by working diligently with community leaders, government partners, first responders, and the public to improve railroad safety and manage and mitigate the impacts that we have on communities. I am happy to take any questions, and I ask that you oppose advancement of HB 204.
Representative Chadwick?
Again, I'm full of questions, so I'll start with an easy one. I've heard the term used, super trains, and those are the ones that are in excess of this 8,500 feet is the definition, I believe, that I've gotten, up to 17,000 feet. Are you aware of if and where those might be running in the state of Wyoming?
Ms. Roseberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Chadwick, I am not familiar with the term super train, but understanding it as you've described it to me, we do have trains of varying lengths. I am not aware of one 17,000 feet that you mentioned, but I can tell you all decisions made on train length are done strategically. They are put through simulators and they are routed to make sure that they are on a route that can fit the train and that can deliver it to its destination safely.
Representative Chadwick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've noted in the bill that if you should exceed this 8,500 feet, which is supposedly the length of a side rail, that it's $1,000 a foot if you exceed that. What does that mean to you, the railroads?
Ms. Roseberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I understand your question, Representative Chadwick. What do you mean from a financial incentive?
Yeah, I think he means
Then
you
what-
want to pay $1,000 a foot fine.
So if I'm just going to use some hypotheticals.
Sure.
So if I don't know, how long is a average, let's say, coal car? 60 feet, 80 feet?
That sounds about right.
Okay, so at $1,000 a foot, if you got one car over, that's an $80,000 fine. What if you had 20 or 30 or 40 or 50?
Certainly.
I mean, it looks to me like this would be a tremendous financial impact.
Ms. Roseberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Chadwick, you're certainly correct. My perspective is, were this bill an act, we would certainly challenge it because from our perspective, it would be unconstitutional and prohibited by many laws.
Representative Chadwick?
Just a further comment. I think you've answered my questions suitably enough that I have no more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Ms. Rosemary. So maybe to try to figure out, I'm sure there are other states that have enacted some sort of law regarding rail, and I'm trying to figure out where the boundary is. And are there specific court cases that you can point me to figure out where the court has ruled a state is going out of bounds and should be overridden by the supremacy of the federal government versus where a state's regulation has been upheld?
Ms. Roseberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Representative Yin, we have a full legal brief that I will submit to the committee. Should you like to see that? I didn't think it was the best use of my testimony time to support or to cite case law. But as it was pointed out initially, the reason there is no federal regulation regarding train length is because there is a Supreme Court case from 1945, which existed well before the FRA even existed, which held that it was actually this exact issue that a state trying to regulate train length is prohibited by the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. So I'm happy to.
Thank you. That's actually very much appreciated. I will take a look at that and hopefully look forward to seeing that brief. The other question I had is there, so assuming technology keeps improving, I think with any network, whether it's a rail network, a road network, an air network, there are pros and cons of where you have to deal with size and congestion and efficiency, et cetera. Is there a limit that the railroads see in where a train could be too long? Is there a future where they see where this doesn't make sense, this train is too long with regards to either safety or congestion, et cetera?
Ms. Roseberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Representative Yin, that is something that is taken into consideration. There was a comment made earlier that I'd like to refute. The railroad invests over $3 billion of capital in our network every year. And so, yes, historically, sidings were only 8,500 feet long or whatever. But we have made significant contributions along areas where we foresee running longer trains so that the sidings associated with those longer trains have the capability to host these trains. And so again, from a strategic network planning and operations perspective, in the areas where it makes sense, those investments will be made so that we have the capability, again, to efficiently and safely run our trains, which is a high priority for us.
Representative Yin?
So just one last time. So there's no length that you would testify to that would be too long at this point, though?
Ms. Roseberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know how to answer that question. Again, it's based on putting them through the algorithms, the simulations, all of the things that our very smart people in network operations determine. But I imagine at some point there is. I just don't want to speculate as to what that number would be.
Representative Wiley.
Chairman. Mr. Rosemary, within the state of Wyoming, how long has the railroads been running these additional length trains for? Are we talking this last couple of years, COVID period, longer additional time? And then just on average, anything longer than that kind of normal 8,500 feet?
Ms. Roseberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't want to ascribe to a normal train length. Even our average now, having run some longer trains over the past, couple of years, our average is still probably closer to 8,500 than it would be, higher than that. I would say since technology has improved, and so data that comes, from our PTC system, and other real-time monitoring that's available that, currently or previously was not, and understanding, again, the in-train forces, buff and draft forces, just advanced train handling capabilities, and again, having the simulators, able to do these things. I would say, from my experience, within the last 5 years, they've probably been looking at extending train length, but there are also many inputs into that equation. It has to do with, crew availability, locomotive availability. So there are a lot of things that go into making those decisions, as opposed to just sitting down and trying to put the largest train out on the network that you can.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Please.
Mr. Rosemary, during this period of time, have you had any kind of recording or anything of an uptick in, incidents of personnel being injured or trains, having more impactful situations?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Representative Wiley, if I understand your question, I believe you're asking, so as you've begun to run longer trains, have you seen an impact on either mainline derailments or employee injuries? Is that kind of what you're asking? So I would say I've been in the chief safety officer role for the last about year and a half, but prior to that, I was the primary attorney for the operating and safety department. So I'm pretty aware of what the numbers look like. And I would say when we first started to run longer trains, we probably had a higher incident of mainline derailments because we didn't have as broad of a depth of understanding of the in-train forces. And I would say that was in about 18 or 19, but since then, again, we've come a long way. We have the Operating Practices Command Center that I referenced to you that, again, has come up with specific algorithms and other formulas to really understand, depending on the length and tonnage of a train, how many DPUs are required, what grades can it run over, where can you take this, where can you not? And so I would say maybe initially we saw a few more mainline derailments, but significant reductions have been made since those improvements have taken place. And in fact, we just closed out our year-end safety reporting for 2022 with a significant improvement in employee safety.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. A lot of times we get admin and the forces that are running the companies rather than on down the line. So I'm kind of asking about that. It seems to me as though throughout the history of Wyoming, rail service has become less and less and less and less, which is bad. I would like to see passenger trains. But to go along with that, if the trains continue to get longer and longer, is that going to make determinations on which companies have to keep up with the rail systems, and possibly at their own expense, which companies may be able to meet those requirements to have longer trains come in to pick up product and to turn around and to do all those things? Is that going to be handled by the rail system? Is that going to be dependent upon each industry, or how's that going to work? Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, if I may address the Representative Ottman, if I want to make sure that I understand your questions. You had a question about passenger rail. You had a question about Okay, so no question about passenger rail. Good, because we don't do passenger rail. You had a question about infrastructure, and you had a question, or I don't know if it was a question or a comment about rail volume decreasing. Did I understand?
Representative Ottman?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm sorry that it was vague. What I'm wondering is a lot of times transportation can determine what products, what companies are in fact able to stay in business and use what's there. You're a nationwide company. You have a lot of power and a lot of expertise. And in Wyoming, we have a lot of product. But nevertheless, is it going to be up to those industries to meet your requirements for these long trains, or are you going to work with our industries?
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ottman. Couple of things about how the rail industry works. We have been talking about trains as though they're a monolith. We have unit trains which would be a train of one commodity or one product going from one origin to one destination. We also have our carload or manifest network that is similar. I sometimes call it a milk run. A local train goes around, say, out of the Rollins yard and picks up local traffic, consolidates that into a train of mixed freight and takes that to, say, Green River, to the yard there, where it's further consolidated, broken up, ordered so that when it gets to Ogden, Utah, it can be put into other blocks. And so there are customers that only require maybe a 1 or 2 car spot. There are customers that want to be able to chamber 12 trains at a time. We work very closely through our commercial team with all of those customers to say what makes sense. How do you do that? In general, the mainline track and the sidings are funded by the railroad, and the industry track is funded by the industry. In addition, kind of in that whole mix is our common carrier obligation, that if a company tenders a legal product in the proper way, we have an obligation to handle that. So we'll work with them to figure out a way to make that work.
Let's take some more. You have general testimony?
Mr. Chairman, I was hoping to put a finer point on the response.
Or you want to follow up on the response? Go ahead.
If that's okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman.
But introduce yourself first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Matt Jones, BNSF Railway. I'm the Executive Director for Public Affairs, BNSF Railway. As an
and turn on your mic.
It's on. I just wasn't close enough. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, I hope that this example will answer your question. But BNSF Railway currently, and for I don't know for how long, but for a number of years, has operated a mixed merchandise train on our Casper subdivision, which means it has different carloads from multiple different customers. And that train, from time to time, is over 8,500 feet. It can be over 9,000 feet. And so with this legislation, Wyoming customers will be negatively impacted because we will have to cut off any car that exceeds the 8,500 feet, and they will have to wait for the next available train and the next local service opportunity. And so, that is one example where this legislation will specifically have a negative impact on just that small customer in Wyoming.
Representative Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And any one of you can answer this that might have the answer, and I just can't help myself. So I sat down with Wyoming Mining Association. I see representatives in here today. And they were telling us about coal deliveries in particular, where I'm going to use fictitious numbers. 100 million tons were sold, but they only had train capacity to deliver 80 million tons. So 20% short of what they had actually sold. And I think everybody here in this room knows how important that other 20% is to this state. You know, not only in jobs, but in taxes, et cetera. You know, our school facilities is shot. We're having to scrape together dollars. Can you speak to that for us?
Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chadwick, as I mentioned before, one of the challenges that we have in our network right now is hiring enough people. We are currently offering $20,000 signing bonuses and $25,000 travel allowances and relocation bonuses to move people into Wyoming. We are still not able to find enough people in the state or willing to come to the state to operate trains. This is a considerable challenge for us. But if we had shorter trains mandated by state regulation, while that regulation was in place to be able to live up to that standard prior to it being challenged or stayed, we would have fewer total trains, which means we would have fewer tons of coal moving.
All right. Thank you for your comments and for taking our questions. We'll move to some additional public testimony. Unless you haven't really given public testimony, I don't know if you want.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I would
Yeah.
like to provide some additional testimony. Again, I'm Matt Jones, a Public Affairs Director for BNSF Railway. And I would like to, just emphasize that we understand how important safe and efficient rail transportation service is to the state of Wyoming. And Wyoming produces very, very important minerals and agricultural products and other goods that are so critical to the national economy, and they're really important to BNSF's business, right? I mean, so we appreciate that this body, this committee in particular today, but the Wyoming legislature for a number of years has given close attention to what's going on in the railroad business, and we really appreciate that and take it very seriously. But I think a number of things have been said in the testimony today that need to be clarified or corrected. Trains over 8,500 feet have been common for quite a long time. In fact, prior to 2008, North American railroads were running trains over 10,000 feet as a matter of course. But in 2008, BNSF added distributed power to those longer trains at that time. Right? So that meant back then putting locomotives on the rear end, which dramatically improved their efficiency and their operational performance, right? So, I mean, that happened 14 years ago now. And those trains were over 10,000 feet. And then in, around 2015, we started doing a lot of testing and modeling of 15,000 and 16,000 foot intermodal trains. And they have proven to be extremely safe, extremely efficient, and an important part of improving the overall performance of the railroad network. So we took that experience in the improving technology with distributed power, putting locomotives in the middle of the train and keeping them at both ends of the train as well, and started looking at, okay, how can we improve our delivery of bulk commodities like coal and agricultural products? And so we started testing that back in 2016. And it's a very, very deliberate process that goes into determining a new makeup of a train. We don't just try it out and see if it's going to work or not. Start out first, they model it, and they use all sorts of computer technology to look at going over mountain grades and the in-train forces and how it's going to perform. And if the modeling shows that it should be safe, then they start to do on-the-ground tests. We start to do on-the-ground tests, but that includes, the involvement of our train crews, but also additional officers on the train, road foreman of engine. He accompanies those pilot runs and records all the data. So we've got technology in the cab of the locomotive that records the data, but the road foreman of engines is on there too, taking notes and monitoring the performance of that train. So there's a in-depth analysis that goes on before we actually start, running these as a matter of our regular business. And then after that, it goes back to headquarters and our operating practices group. They go through a whole nother round of analyzing all of that data to make sure that, it in fact is proven to be safe and effective and is improving the operation of the network, right? So we don't put a long train on a corridor where we have a bunch of short sidings and we've got a bunch of traffic going in both directions, because it wouldn't make sense. It would cause the network to, slow down. So there's no business reason to do that. And it's certainly, not something that we would do intentionally, is put a long train on a part of the network where it would slow it down. Earlier, the comment was made that, coal trains are the short trains on the network in Wyoming, and they're the ones sitting and waiting for these longer trains to come by. That's absolutely untrue. BNSF, for a number of years now, we have combined coal trains in order to assist with situations where we have a shortage of crews, or we see an opportunity to improve the customer service just because of the traffic on the network. And so we're combining coal trains, empties and loads, in order to provide better service to our customers. And, if we were limited to 8,500 feet, we wouldn't be able to do that when it made sense. And that would have a negative impact on our ability to deliver Wyoming coal. And I think, I hope you'll hear today from rail customers in Wyoming that, are concerned about that very real possibility. So, so I know short on time, but thank you very much, and I am willing to answer any questions.
Committee? All right, let's get some rail custom,
Sorry,
go ahead,
Mr.
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So maybe just one quick question. If the bill on page 3, and we struck line 14 and just made it so you couldn't run any train that exceeded the length of the shortest passing track or siding on which it travels on any main or branch line, would that be satisfactory? Mr. Chairman? Question to the railroads, I guess.
Okay. Any of you want that question?
Mr. Chairman, Representative
Mr. Jones?
That would not help the problems that exist with this bill. I mean, that would dramatically, again, limit our ability to manage the efficient operation of the railroad. If you have an area of single track with, so it's single track and siding, say for 200 miles, and you've got a bunch of 8,000 foot sidings, but you happen to have a 6,000 foot siding on that, that subdivision, for example, then we would have to limit every train on that subdivision to 6,000, 6,500 feet, whatever that shortest siding is. So to answer your question, that would be extremely problematic.
Mr. Chairman, if I can add a little bit of technicolor to what Mr. Jones just said. Sidings are one aspect of network fluidity. And so you may have a track with, multiple long sidings, 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, and one that's 4,200 feet. And that 4,200 feet may be used to stage materials, for example, when we do repairs and maintenance. It would be inappropriate, I think, to try to constrict the entire corridor for a siding that exists for that purpose, or that could stash a locomotive to wait for a train. And I think that as we look at the totality of the bill, that any constraint on how a railroad operates and the economic decisions that are made fall into that area of federal preemption. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for your public testimony. Additional public testimony. Raise your hand if you're going to testify on this bill. Okay. Perfect. Welcome, Mr. Detai.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's not often that I get to testify before the Corporations Committee, so I'm honored to be here. My name is Travis Detai.
It's not
I am-
often we have a transportation bill in corporations that you get to testify on.
Anything goes these days, Mr. Chairman. My name is Travis Detai. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association, and appreciate all the previous testimony today. And a little bit about us, since we don't come before you often. We are the state's trade association for the state's mining companies. We represent 30 companies producing bentonite coal, trona, uranium, and lignite, as well as companies developing gold and rare earth deposits. We also represent about 100 associate member companies. These are the companies that provide service and supplies to the mines, 2 electrical co-ops, and 1 advanced nuclear power company. And we come here in opposition to House Bill 204. We understand the intent. We rely on dependable rail service to move our mine products, specifically coal, natural soda ash from our trona, and bentonite every single day. We rely on the railroads. We rely on the people in this room. Whether it's the railroads themselves, the people who drive and maintain the trains, they are all critical to our industry. We rely on them. However, we find ourselves in the unfortunate position today where, largely due to the railroad shortage of manpower and other factors, where we simply cannot get enough trains to move our products. This is impacting all 3 of my major sectors. One of my trona managers has described the service in Southwest Wyoming as hit or miss. Some days trains arrive, some days they don't. I was recently in the Bighorn Basin with one of my bentonite operators, and I was told that his company had struck a deal with the railroad operating in that particular region to regularly receive the necessary cars 3 days a week. But on that day, they failed to arrive. But the lack of service is impacting the Powder River Basin coal producers probably the most. And to say that the service has been bad over the last 18 plus months is probably an understatement. And Mr. Chairman, they are very, very frustrated right now. Demand for Wyoming coal is very high at this time, and the inability to get that coal to customers across the country is frustrating, to say the least. We simply cannot get enough trains. The final quarter of 22 was simply dreadful. In fact, during the December cold snap, 1 PRB coal mine received no trains at all on 2 consecutive days. So the lack of adequate service and this lack of adequate service to PRB coal producers, as has been mentioned a couple of times before, we lost an estimated 50 million tons of production in 2022. And of course, this hurts my company's bottom line and has also resulted in significant lost revenue to the state of Wyoming. My membership believes this bill will make an already bad situation even worse. Some good discussion here today. We are running longer trains out of the PRB right now, up to 100 cars, and in some cases, as you've heard, trains are being connected. The impacts of this bill, and just some back of the number math that I was doing while I was sitting listening to testimony, assuming a car, the length of a car is 68 feet, 150 car train of coal, that's 10,500 feet. If you're coupling those, it's much longer. And so, the impacts of the bill in shortening these trains, necessitating more trains, when the railroad lacks personnel to drive and maintain what is needed today, it just doesn't pencil out. And for the other commodities, we feel that if this bill was in effect, the railroads are going to they're going to pick who gets the cars on the shorter trains. And again, when we can't get the cars that we need now, this exacerbates the problem. Quite simply, my members believe shortening available trains will make the bad situation worse. And we all want to see the railroad situation improve. But Mr. Chairman, this is just not the right bill at the right time. And we respectfully urge the committee to vote no on this and to not pass it. And I would also like to add, Mr. Chairman, one final thing. I was contacted this morning by Mr. Keith Kennedy, representing the Wyoming Wheat Growers Association. He was unable to be here this morning, but asked that I relay that the Wyoming wheat growers oppose this bill as well, as it would impact cross-country shipments for wheat export. 50% of our wheat is exported, and they believe that this would impact the wheat industry nationwide. So I'll put on my ag hat as well and say that the Wyoming wheat growers are also in opposition to this bill. And with that, I would stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mr. Detai, Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Detai, what do you think that the state of Wyoming can do to improve our rail?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Representative Yin, that's an outstanding question, and I don't know the answer to it. I think that's one of the frustrations that we have as producers and that the state of Wyoming is we are very, very dependent on the railroads, and not to put too fine a point on it, but they need to work to fix the problem.
Vice Chairman Knapp?
Mr. Chairman, that was my question is, do you see this as a vendor-customer problem? Although the vendor is somewhat of a monopoly in the state.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, I think there are a lot of issues at play right now, whether it's the railroad's ability to hire and staff up appropriately, weather plays a concern. There are a lot of things that are just out of our control. I think what we have seen in recent months, we have seen the railroads come to the table and really recognize the problem that we're having right now, and I think they're doing what they can to address it. But you got to get people back to work, I think.
Ms. Delancey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've got to go testify on another bill, so I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Detai. Sorry, Cindy. Now,
Mr.
Ms. Delancey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. I bring to you maybe a little bit of a different conversation. We've heard from our subject matter experts. We've heard from our safety experts. We've heard from the coal customers. Now I'd like to bring you the business perspective in this conversation. House Bill 204 is simply bad for business. And what I mean by that is approximately 77 cents of every dollar that is funding our budget right now comes from the extraction industry. Passing House Bill 204 would be yet another government attempt to overregulate and codify operational decisions made by our industries. Our industry's most important asset is their people. Every industry, whether it's the extraction industry, the rail industry, the ag industry, the hospitality industry, everybody wants their employees to go home safe and in the way that they came to work. So to put forth that for some unforeseen reason, this is going to improve safety and work conditions is just, in my estimation, I submit to you, simply a red herring. This is a business bill. Simply put, less trains equals less cars equals less product equals less money. Less money to the state of Wyoming's general fund, which I know all of you are very keenly aware of protecting that and investing our funds for the future so our state can remain viable and strong as we go forward. The reason why that the states, we've heard from the subject matter experts that there is no federal regulation setting train length is because, again, that is an operational decision that rests with the business, not the state of Wyoming. Now, you also heard testimony that there's other states trying to attempt to take that freedom of operational exercise away from businesses in Iowa, Missouri, Virginia, Kansas. I submit to you, we don't want to be Iowa, Missouri, Virginia, Kansas. We like who we are in Wyoming, and who we are in Wyoming is people and policymakers that support our businesses. So, and just in closing, I direct you again, to subpart C and D and the civil penalties and fines and, making a tough situation already worse, as we heard from Mr. Detai, is not the answer if there is a dilemma to be had. But I also, looking at the dollars and cents, just the business case, the fiscal note of this is indeterminable. Passing this bill, we wouldn't even know or understand the consequences of the financial impact that this bill could have on our state. But what we do know is the testimony from your agent, from our agency, WYDOT, that we'd have to hire more lawyers, we'd have to promulgate rules, regulations. To me, that sounds like more staff and more growth of government. So for all these reasons, Mr. Chairman, I ask that the committee vote no on this and allow our industries to continue to do what they think, is in the best of interest of their employees, their business, and our state.
Questions for Ms. Delancey? All right, thank you for your testimony. Additional public testimony. I believe there were all four of you want to testify? Or, yeah? If so, come on up, all four of you. Just we have about 18 minutes left of our committee meeting, and if you want us to pass the bill, we'll need a little bit of time to work the bill, so just keep that in mind. I'm not trying to cut you short, just trying to make you cognizant of our time. We'll start over here on the right, or your left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Olson. My name is Corey Runyon. I'm an engineer, works out of Cheyenne here. I'm the chairman for the Wyoming State Legislative Board of Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. I started as a conductor in 1997 and became an engineer in 2000. I want to give you some of my working experience and let you know that the infrastructure doesn't really support these kind of trains. You have certain issues like a terminal, putting a train together, and even when you arrive, taking it apart. These trains take several tracks, and a lot of times, as you've heard, it's almost like putting multiple trains together. Some of the other things is when you pick up, you reach a terminal like here in Cheyenne, you might pick some cars up and set them out. Or if your train breaks down en route. The things I want you to think about is that I think there are safety issues with all of those incidents is communication with the conductor and having a radio that reaches far enough to the head end. Sometimes we can't talk to each other. Another thing is that they're very heavy and slow. You know, when you had a normal train, it was a few hundred car, 100 cars or less. You might have a bad car that needs to be set out that is 40 or 50 cars back. Now you're dealing with cars that might be 100, 150, 200 cars back. It's a lot more weight. You have to go a lot slower for the protection of the crew. And not only that, you know, keeping things on the rail. As you can imagine, doing this causes more crossings to be blocked. Also like you to know that when you're picking up cars here in Cheyenne, sometimes we have to go way past. I go from North Platte to Cheyenne, so we'll have to go west of town in order to pick a car up or set it out. And we do have that Terrell crossing blocked quite often. The thing is these trains are also very slow. So we might be slowed down by putting a big train together. It takes time, more time delayed out of the terminal. And then a lot of times they go a lot slower. Well, you can only go as fast as the train ahead of you. So you are going slower to get over the road. If you break down, there's those trains stuck behind you. A lot of times this causes a recrew, more than once to get that train over the road. Now, as you can imagine, these trains are really big, so there's not many places you don't block a crossing. Currently, where I work, they stop the state line and they will tie trains down. We are double main where I work. Now, it's a 10-mile crossover from one track to the other. So you could fit 2 trains in that 10 miles, possibly 3 if you're really lucky. And then the eastbounds and the westbounds are waiting for trains to go through that single main now. This causes like a log jam and it slows things down. Same thing at terminals. When you're setting cars out or picking them up, you have to be much slower, really think out what you're doing when you're handling the size of train and the weight. And those safety things always come to play. Communication, how fast you're going, how heavy it is, and it takes time. And you only have so many tracks here in Cheyenne. It takes longer to get other trains that are stuck behind that big train doing work through town. We feel we could maybe, with better fluidity, move more trains. The crews do. Now, I don't have all the numbers of things, but I'm just telling you from my own perspective and when we work out there, that slows everything down. I can give you lots of different experience. I've been there when we've had to cut crossings for EMTs. And I've also been on the railroad long enough and been dealing with this issue. But when I was trained in 2000, a long train was about 8,000 foot. And shortly after that, they started going bigger, and now we're up to, we run them daily between 10 and 15,000 foot. There is one train that we can take over our subdivision that can be 18,000 foot, although that does not happen very often right now. So I've seen the changes. And I also know that nobody really trained us for this. I learned how to run a train on an 8,000 foot train, long train. I taught myself how to run these bigger, longer trains, and then asked for them to give us training on their remote control and different things so we could get more training. But I mean, being an old head and being out here for a while, I feel like we kind of learned the process as we went along and didn't always have the help from the company. There are currently no federal regulations limiting train length for safety or congestion, but I believe the state has a right to regulate safety, and they can do that through limiting train length. So that's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman, and I can stand by for questions. Thank you.
Okay, sir, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. My name is Jay Hewerman. I live here in Cheyenne. I'm a railroad engineer. I've been working for in the industry since 1998. I'm currently employed with Union Pacific as an engineer. I wanted to talk about the train length a little bit today. The Union Pacific, where I work, they started to adopt some of the principles of PSR back in 2015. And one of the basic tenets of this business strategy is to make the trains as long as possible by putting as many cars on them as they can. And the idea is to use fewer crew members and fewer locomotives to move the same number of cars. And so when I first started on the railroad, a typical train was about 6,500 to 7,000 feet long. And now, as Corey said, they're typically running them 12,000 plus feet, and they tell us that they want to get them up to 20,000. But anyway, when they first started running these longer trains, we immediately started to experience a lot of operational problems. There were a lot of trains that broke in half. The couplers and the drawbars that hold them together literally come apart because they're pushing the limits of what the equipment can handle. In 2015, I was asked to participate in a process improvement committee that studied these problems. I wish that I could share the numbers and the data from that with you guys, but I don't believe that I can because it's proprietary inside information, basically. But it's not pretty. And the committee tried all kinds of things to try to bring this broken train problems under control, but nothing really worked. And in the long run, my coworkers and I have gotten a little better at keeping the trains in one piece by basically just simply slowing down. And at the end of the day, if I wanted you to take anything away from this discussion, I want you to understand that in the US and Canada, there's a network of railroad tracks. And in the industry, we talk a lot, you've heard this term already today, about network fluidity. And when the railroad is moving like it's supposed to, the network is fluid. When things come to a stop, it's not fluid. And these mega trains, because of their size, their lower speeds, and propensity to break in half and have these mechanical problems, they cause a lot of congestion and they disrupt the fluidity of the network. So Wyoming's coal mines have been having a lot of trouble getting adequate service from the railroads because the capacity to do so has been sort of choked off by these mega trains. I know it's sort of ironic and it's counterintuitive, but to make these trains longer actually reduces the capacity of the network. And in fact, if you look at Union Pacific's annual report, you will see that back in about 5 years ago, we used to run, the railroad used to handle about 220,000 carloads a week. And that was before they started really increasing the size of these trains. And now they don't have the capacity to go more than about 160 or 165,000 carloads a week. So that's where we're at with this thing. So I don't know, I could talk about some more stuff, but I think that's about all I have for today. I guess. I know we're running short on time, so I'll cut it short because I know these gentlemen here want to speak too, so.
Thank you. Sir, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alexander Brew. I'm a locomotive engineer out of Cheyenne, 11 years of service, of which 9 years I've had my engineer certification. I guess just for brevity's sake, I'd like to say I agree with everything that the previous speakers here today have said at this table. And I'm in strong support for House Bill 204. And also I'd like to add the comment that contrary to my personal experience regarding railroading is very much contrary to what maybe the companies have stated today. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dick Merklin. I'm a retired engineer off Union Pacific Railroad. I spoke to many active crew members from Cheyenne and North Platte here in the past month, and if they would have all been here, it would have filled this room. A lot of what you've heard today is not exactly on target. I can't take the time to single out everything that was said by the railroad representatives, but a lot of what they said was not right. When I was working on the railroad, we had what they called CTC, Centralized Traffic Control. That system was set up to handle 5 trains an hour. That's a 12-minute interval. Can't do that now with these 13, 16,000 foot long trains. It's impossible. No mention by any of the people who have opposed this bill today have they made any connection with the communities that the railroads slice in two because the train runs right through the middle of the town. And if you or any one of your family members should have a medical emergency and you're on the wrong side of the track, you're going to die because the train's not going to get cut. There used to be a 10-minute rule. If you can't clear a crossing in 10 minutes, it was cut. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, but it was done for a reason. I can guarantee you that you haven't lived until you've had an irate farmer start throwing rocks at you, or worse yet, be shot at. I have. Personal knowledge. And the reason that farmer was upset with me this one time, it's been several times, but the one time was he was going to be late to get home for dinner, and his wife was going to be upset. I couldn't do anything about it. I was looking at a positive red signal. I had to wait on the signal. He wouldn't understand that. He kept throwing the rocks. He shot at us twice with a .22 rifle. Luckily, the steel's thick enough it didn't go through. But that's what you're going to be contended with. And these people, the Union Pacific Railroad, since I retired, put in at least 10 overpasses west of North Platte for the express purpose of having access to both sides. What about the dozens of other communities that they go through that don't have that luxury now? I guarantee you, somebody somewhere is going to die because the railroad kept the crossing blocked too long. There was talk of embargoes and the lack of getting cars. Right now, the Union Pacific Railroad puts 2 trains together at South Morrill to run east, South Morrill, Nebraska, to run east. That's 300 cars long, and you're looking at 40,000 tons. They got to run all the way through North Platte to change crews when it gets down there. It has gone absolutely berserk. The Union Pacific Railroad was in front of the STB because of embargoes last month. And they're going to have to go back because they didn't give them the information that they wanted or needed, or the STB didn't get the information they wanted. I'll close by saying this, and it's a quote from Martin Luther from 1524. Among themselves, the merchants, railroads, have a common rule, which is their chief maximum. I care nothing about my neighbor so long as I have my profit and satisfy my greed. I ask you to please, Mr. Chairman and committee, pass this bill. It's the right thing to do because you're not looking out for the constituents of this state. If you listen to the negatives that those who oppose this bill have brought forth to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Committee, do you have any questions for any of the members of, I guess, our panel? Representative Ottman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will